Imagine, you open your eyes in the middle of the night, not because of an alarm clock, not because of the glow from your phone, but because of the cold, a cold so deep that it feels as though it is not merely touching your skin, but slowly creeping inside your body. You are living tens of thousands of years ago. Outside the shelter, the wind sweeps across an almost treeless plain. The ground is frozen. Snow covers the low grasses. Somewhere beyond the darkness, herds of massive animals are moving across the frozen landscape. And you have none of the things a modern human normally thinks of when they hear the word winter. No heater, no electricity, no factory-made winter coat, no sleeping bag, no double-glazed windows, no hospital if your body slips into a dangerous condition, no supermarket where you can walk in and buy several thousand calories of food. If the fire in front of you goes out, you cannot simply switch it back on. If the animal hide wrapped around your body gets wet, you have no dryer. If tomorrow's hunt fails, there is no store waiting for you. And the most frightening part is that the human body was not designed like that of a polar bear. We do not have a thick coat of fur covering our entire bodies. We do not have enormous fur-covered feet for walking across snow. We do not have the massive bodies of mammoths. Compared with many animals that live in cold environments, humans seem almost too fragile. And yet there is a strange truth. Humans lived in extremely cold regions during some of the harshest periods of the Pleistocene. They hunted animals, raised children, made tools, traveled across vast landscapes, and winter after winter they survived. Not because they were immune to the cold, not because prehistoric humans possessed some superhuman body that we have since lost, but because they did something our species has always been remarkably good at. They transformed a relatively vulnerable body into a survival system. Animal hides became the fur that evolution never gave us. Fire became a source of heat outside the body. Shelter became a second skin. Fat became fuel. Tools allowed humans to extract energy from a brutal world, and other human beings became a protective network that no individual could ever create alone. But to understand just how important all of these things were, we first have to understand the real enemy. Because the thing that kills you during the Ice Age does not necessarily have to be a predator. It does not even need teeth. Sometimes. All it has to do is make your body lose heat faster than you can produce it. Your body is constantly performing a task you almost never notice, keeping its internal temperature within an appropriate range. At this very moment, chemical reactions inside your body are producing heat. Your heart is beating, your muscles are working, your organs are consuming energy. The food you eat is eventually transformed into fuel for the entire system. But that heat does not stay with you forever. It is constantly escaping into the environment, and as the environment gets colder, especially when wind or moisture is involved, the challenge becomes increasingly difficult. For a prehistoric human, this was not a matter of comfort, it was a matter of time. Imagine a hunter separated from his group. He has traveled farther than expected. Darkness begins to fall. The wind grows stronger. His clothing is damp. He is exhausted. And, more importantly, he is hungry. At first, his body responds. Blood vessels near the skin constrict to reduce heat loss. Blood is prioritized toward the core of the body. He begins to shiver. Shivering is not simply a sign that you feel cold. It is a mechanism for generating heat. Muscles contract rapidly, consuming energy and producing warmth. In other words, the body is burning fuel simply to keep itself functioning. But that fuel is not unlimited. If heat loss continues, muscular coordination may begin to deteriorate. The ability to think clearly may decline. Decisions that would normally be simple begin to become difficult. And this is precisely what makes cold environments so dangerous. The cold does not merely attack the body. It can weaken your ability to use the very intelligence you need to escape it. So for prehistoric humans, survival could not begin once they were already cold. It had to begin before that. You had to anticipate the cold. You needed something that could prevent heat from escaping your body. And perhaps one of the most important turning points came when our ancestors realized that if nature had not given humans thick enough fur, they could take it from another species. A reindeer does not need to learn how to sew a coat. A wolf does not need to prepare clothing before winter. Evolution has already done that for them. Humans are different. Most of our skin is exposed to the environment, and that creates an obvious disadvantage when entering cold climates. But humans possess something else: hands capable of incredibly precise manipulation, brains capable of planning, and culture capable of passing techniques from one person to another. Imagine a fresh animal hide removed from a carcass. It is not yet a piece of clothing. Turning it into useful material requires knowledge. The hide has to be processed, scraped, cleaned, softened, and, depending on the technique and intended purpose, it can be modified to fit the human body more effectively. This is where one tiny tool becomes extraordinarily important: the bone needle. Needles dating to the Paleolithic show that humans developed the ability to create sewn clothing, and that is very different from simply wrapping an animal hide around your shoulders. A fitted garment can cover the body more effectively. Separate pieces of material can be joined together. Arms and legs can be protected. Layers of clothing can reduce the amount of cold air continuously coming into direct contact with the skin. And if you think about this in another way, this represents an extraordinary turning point. Most animals must wait thousands of generations to evolve a new adaptive trait. Humans can manufacture an adaptation within a single generation. We did not grow thicker fur. We wore the fur of other species. Technology began doing part of evolution's work. But even good clothing has its limits, because you still have to sleep. You still have to remain still. You still have to protect small children. You still have to survive long nights. And when temperatures fall, a layer of animal hide is not always enough. Humans needed to create a small environment inside the larger environment, a place where the wind could not easily steal their body heat. When we think of prehistoric humans, we often imagine caves. That is why the word caveman still survives in popular culture. But that image can be misleading. Not every landscape has caves. Not every cave is suitable for habitation, and hunter-gatherer groups often had to move according to available resources. That meant humans needed the ability to create shelter in places where nature did not provide one. At several Paleolithic sites in Eastern Europe, archaeologists have discovered structures associated with large quantities of mammoth bones: skulls, jawbones, long bones. These enormous materials were arranged into structures that researchers have spent years trying to understand. Some have been interpreted as foundations or components of shelters, and the image is almost unbelievable: a nearly hairless primate standing in the middle of a frozen landscape, building living spaces from the remains of one of the largest animals on the plains. But bones were not necessarily the entire structure. Organic materials such as hides, wood, or other materials may have played important roles, but are often difficult to preserve across tens of thousands of years. What matters more is the principle. A good shelter did not need to make winter disappear. It only needed to change the rate at which the human body lost heat, block the wind, maintain a relatively stable layer of air, create a space where several people could gather together, allow fire to be used more efficiently, protect children and other vulnerable members of the group. And this is where we begin to see something important. Prehistoric humans did not defeat the cold with a single invention. They stacked multiple layers of protection on top of one another. The body generated heat. Clothing preserved heat. Shelter reduced heat loss. But there was still one thing capable of changing the entire equation. Something that transformed darkness into light, raw food into cooked food, and a freezing night into a place where human beings could gather. Fire. Imagine a prehistoric camp at night. Beyond the circle of light, there is darkness. Inside it, there are people. The fire creates a boundary. And that boundary is not merely between warmth and cold. It is between an environment humans can control and one they cannot. Fire provides heat, but its value goes far beyond that. It allows food to be cooked. It provides light after sunset. It can assist in processing materials. It can encourage some animals to keep their distance. And most importantly for our story, fire allows humans to move a source of heat outside their own bodies. An animal that wants to stay warm must depend largely on its own physiology. Humans can burn wood. That is a profoundly important shift. But fire also creates a new problem. You have to maintain it. Fuel must be gathered. Firewood has to be kept dry enough to burn. The fire must be tended. In some circumstances, preserving hot embers may have been far more important than having to start a new fire from scratch. Imagine a small group at the end of the day. Some people return from searching for food. One person brings fuel, someone checks the fire, someone repairs clothing, someone cares for the children. Suddenly, survival no longer looks like the story of one lone man fighting against nature. It looks like a system, but even with fire, the body still has to generate its own heat. And to do that, it needs fuel. A lot of fuel. And this is where one of the least glamorous resources of the Ice Age becomes extraordinarily important: fat. When we imagine prehistoric humans hunting large animals, we usually focus on meat. An animal is brought down. The hunters succeed. Meat is carried back to camp. But in a harsh environment, not every calorie is equal. Fat has a much higher energy density than protein or carbohydrates. And when the body has to function in a cold environment, energy expenditure can become a matter of survival. Think again about the shivering hunter. Shivering produces heat, but producing heat requires energy. Walking through snow requires energy. Hunting requires energy. Carrying meat back to camp requires energy. Building shelter requires energy. Gathering fuel requires energy. Even maintaining your body temperature comes at a cost. So the question is not simply, do you have food? It is also, how much energy does that food provide? That is why animal fat, bone marrow, and other energy-rich parts could become incredibly valuable. Marrow is especially interesting. A long bone may look like something to discard, but break it open, and inside is a nutrient-rich source of energy. Evidence of deliberately broken bones at numerous archaeological sites shows that our human ancestors learned long ago how to exploit the valuable resources hidden inside them. But there is another layer to this story. The body itself can also store energy as fat. Body fat is not a magical winter coat that allows a naked person to stand outside in the snow, but it contributes to energy storage and provides a certain degree of insulation. More importantly, in an environment where tomorrow's hunt might produce nothing, stored energy is time. Time to find food, time to survive a period of terrible weather, time for the body to keep functioning when calorie intake falls. But this creates a paradox. To survive the cold, you need energy. To obtain energy, you have to go out into the cold. And to hunt a large animal, you have to confront another kind of danger. Imagine you are standing just a few dozen meters away from a massive animal. It weighs many times more than you do. You have no gun, no vehicle, no armor. In your hands is technology made from stone, wood, bone, and the accumulated experience of countless generations. One wrong move, and you could be injured. And during the Ice Age, a serious injury was dangerous, not only because of the wound itself. It could leave you unable to walk, unable to find food, unable to gather firewood, unable to follow the group when they moved. An injured leg in a cold environment could begin a deadly chain of events. So hunting required more than courage. It required strategy. Projectile weapons allowed humans to strike from greater distances. Cooperation allowed multiple people to take part. Knowledge of animal behavior helped them predict where animals would move. Understanding the terrain allowed humans to turn the landscape itself into part of the hunt. And perhaps most importantly, experience could be passed down. A child did not have to discover everything from the beginning. They could observe, be taught, listen to stories, learn where the herds traveled, learn which tracks were fresh, learn which kinds of stone produced sharp edges, learn how to read the wind, learn when not to hunt. This is the strange power of culture. A human being can die, but their knowledge does not necessarily have to die with them. And in a world where a single mistake could cost you your life, the ability to inherit the experience of others could be just as important as an animal hide coat. Up to this point, we have talked mostly about adults. But now place a child in the Ice Age. Suddenly, the survival equation becomes much more difficult. Young children cannot hunt for themselves. They cannot make their own clothing. They cannot build their own shelter. They cannot maintain a fire by themselves. A newborn cannot even move itself to safety. By the simplest logic of survival, this seems like a terrible disadvantage. And yet humans still manage to raise children like these. And that gives us a clue. Because the true unit of human survival may never have been the individual. It was the group. A child could be kept close to an adult's body, protected with insulating materials, brought inside the shelter, nourished with energy obtained by others. Other members of the group could share the work of caring for and protecting that child. The same principle applied to the injured. If survival depended entirely on your ability to obtain your own food every single day, then any serious injury could become a death sentence. But archaeology has given us cases in which ancient humans survived long enough with serious injuries or severe impairments to raise the possibility that they received support from others. That completely changes the way we see the Ice Age. The best survivor was not necessarily the strongest individual. It may have been the group that was best at sharing. A skilled hunter could bring food back to camp, but an elder could bring knowledge. A skilled toolmaker could make the entire group more effective. Someone caring for children allowed others to perform different tasks. Someone who understood the landscape could help the group avoid a dangerous decision. Humans did not simply share meat. They shared risk. And perhaps that was one of the most important coats we ever invented. An invisible coat made of other human beings. There is a difference between reacting to danger and preparing for danger. A person who is already cold can search for fire, but a person who knows winter is coming can gather fuel before the cold arrives. They can prepare clothing, they can repair the shelter, they can obtain food while it is still available, they can decide when it is time to move, they can observe the animals, they can remember what happened during the previous winter. This is an important cognitive ability, living in the future before the future arrives. Imagine someone noticing the first signs of the approaching cold season. The days are getting shorter. Animal behavior is changing. Plants are changing. The wind is changing. That person is not merely seeing the present. Inside their mind, a winter that does not yet exist has already begun to appear. And because it exists in the mind, they can act today to solve tomorrow's problem. This may be one of the most overlooked elements in the entire story of human survival. Humans do not merely adapt to the environment. We adapt to an imagined version of the future environment. A shelter built before a storm is evidence of imagination. Food saved for tomorrow is evidence of imagination. Clothing repaired before the weather becomes colder is evidence of imagination too. Seen this way, the most powerful tool of the Ice Age may not have been the spear, not fire, not animal hides, but the ability to look at a relatively warm day and imagine the cold that was coming. There is a temptation when we tell the story of human history. We like to turn it into a story of conquest. Humans against nature, humans defeating wild animals, humans conquering the cold. But the reality was probably far more subtle. Prehistoric humans could not command winter to stop. They could not melt the ice. They could not prevent storms. They could not guarantee a successful hunt. They could not ensure that every child survived. And certainly many people died from cold hunger, disease, injury, and countless other causes. Survival does not mean being invincible. It means increasing the odds of staying alive. A little here, a little there. A layer of animal hide that reduces heat loss. A better shelter. A larger supply of firewood. A more effective hunting technique. A better way of extracting fat-rich resources. A wider network for sharing food. A memory of where the herds appeared the previous year. An adult who knows how to make tools passing that skill to a child. None of these things alone creates a miracle. But add them together and you get something far more powerful. Cumulative culture. Each generation did not necessarily have to start again from zero. They could inherit the solutions developed by the generation before them, then modify them, improve them, combine them, and pass them on. This is why an almost naked human body could enter environments where at first glance it seemed not to belong. Humans carried their environment with them. We carried fire, we carried clothing, we carried tools, we carried knowledge, we carried one another, and most importantly, we carried ideas accumulated across generations. Now return to that first night. The wind is still blowing, the snow still lies outside the shelter, the temperature is still low, massive animals are still moving somewhere in the darkness. But this time, look more closely. The prehistoric human in front of you is not truly alone. On their body is material that once belonged to another animal. In their hands is a tool made using a technique they did not invent themselves. Beside them is a fire maintained through knowledge passed down across generations. Around them is a shelter built in a way their community has learned. Inside their body is energy from food that many people helped obtain. And beside them are other human beings. That is the answer. There was no single secret that allowed prehistoric humans to survive the Ice Age. They created multiple layers of protection. The first layer, the body, shivering changes in blood circulation, metabolism, and energy reserves helped the body resist heat loss. The second layer, clothing. Animal hides and fur became the insulation the human body did not naturally possess. The third layer, shelter. Caves where suitable, along with human-made structures elsewhere, helped reduce the effects of wind and the surrounding environment. The fourth layer, fire. A source of heat outside the body that also provided light-supported food preparation and transformed shelter into a social space. The fifth layer, energy. Meat, fat, marrow, and other food sources provided fuel for a body forced to function in a harsh environment. But the final layer may have been the most important of all. Other human beings. One person could sleep, but someone else could tend the fire. One person could be injured, but someone else could share food. A child could not protect itself, but the entire group could protect it. One person could forget, but culture could remember. And that may be the most remarkable thing about the entire story of the Ice Age. Humans did not become great survivors because we had the strongest bodies. We were not the fastest runners. We had no claws, no thick fur, no jaws like those of a great predator. Instead, we learned how to borrow strength from the world around us. We borrowed the fur of animals. We borrowed energy from fire. We turned stone into cutting edges. We turned bone into tools. We turned landscapes into shelter. We turned food into heat. And we transformed a group of fragile individuals into something far stronger than any one person could ever be. Perhaps that is why the real question is not, how did prehistoric humans endure the cold, but rather, how could an animal that was not perfectly equipped for the cold create a small world warm enough to survive inside it? The answer can be found around the fire, in every stitch sewn into animal hide, in the shelters built across frozen landscapes, in the bones cracked open to reach the marrow inside, in the hands passing tools from adults to children, and in the decision to share food with a member of the group who could not hunt for themselves that day. The Ice Age did not merely test the endurance of the human body, it tested our ability to anticipate, our ability to create, our ability to learn, our ability to cooperate, and our ability to pass knowledge on to the next generation. Tens of thousands of years later, we live in houses with heating systems. We wear clothing produced by machines. We preserve food in refrigerators, and with a simple action we can create light or warmth. But beneath all of that technology, the logic of survival remains remarkably familiar. We change our environment instead of waiting for our bodies to evolve to fit it. We accumulate knowledge. We share work. We prepare for problems that have not happened yet. And we depend on other people far more than we usually realize. Perhaps that is the true legacy left behind by those ancient winters. Not a story about primitive cavemen struggling to endure the cold, but the story of an animal that learned that, when its body was not strong enough to stand against the world, it could use its mind to create tools, use memory to prepare for the future, and use community to transform the vulnerability of each individual into the strength of an entire species. And perhaps that is exactly how our ancestors made it through winters that seemed impossible to survive, so that eventually we could be here today. And now imagine something else. If you were transported back to the Ice Age, no electricity, no heater, no stored food, no modern technology, how long do you think you could survive? 1 day, 1 week, or perhaps even an entire winter? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring strange questions about how our ancestors survived, adapted, and ultimately became the humans we are today, subscribe to HistoryInSticks and turn on notifications so you do not miss the stories coming next. Because the cold was only one of countless challenges ancient humans had to face. And in the next video, we will travel back through time once again to explore an even more frightening question without doctors, hospitals, or modern medicine. How did prehistoric humans survive disease and serious injuries?